all of the feelings are important. And one of the main reasons they're important is because our ability to embrace our feelings is our healing, and our ability to share those feelings with others is our loving. That's really what love is. Love is sharing your reality with another person. And I think that when people really do share their pain, even sometimes you can see they're sharing their anger or talking about what their fears are or dealing with shame, that's an act of love. And we do tend to feel closer to people that are sharing with us at that level. When people are controlling and denying the feelings, you feel more distance from them. You don't feel closer. And there was a question also about how control and addiction are tied together, because I mentioned that there's a correlation. And maybe the easiest way of putting it is if you imagine that when we're trying to control too much because of the shame and the fear and the distrust and things that we've gone through, it's like a pressure cooker. And eventually that pressure cooker is either going to explode or we got to have a release valve. I think our addictions are sometimes a release valve so we don't explode. And in some ways, they can be the healthiest part of our life. But if you walk up to an alcoholic and say, hey, you got to quit drinking, I'm taking away the healthiest part of their life. The one time they get to be out of control. So then they're going to have to try and control everything, and then they might blow up. So what we replace that with is a program. And the program most alcoholics use is called a 12-step program. What's the first step address? It addresses issues of control. It says, hey, why don't you just admit that your life is unmanageable, that you're powerless, you're out of control. It's like a friend of mine. He says, I was driving through life. He says, I was doing great. He says, I had the Wagoneer and the condo in Colorado and the family and everything. And, he says, I was cruising. I'd go around bumps and hills and through mountains and under things and around things. And I thought I was a great driver until my wife left me and took the kids. He says, all of a sudden, I had to get out of my car. And I got a little bit away from it, and I finally took a look at it. And he said, the car I'd been driving was one of these Fisher-Price kiddie cars, where its steering wheel isn't even connected to the front wheels. And so a lot of us who think we're driving through life so well better look and see if our steering wheels are even connected to the front wheels. So and it's a paradox. It's a paradox of addiction that the one thing we think we need, which is I got to get in control of this food, I got to stop eating, is the one thing that we have to face that we can't have, which is control. We got to give up control to gain control. We got to see our powerlessness to find our power. We've got to see our unmanageability to become manageable. That's the first step, and that's a paradox of addiction throughout. Now, I've been talking about addiction and feelings. I also need then to talk about what happens in families, because generally, if you have a dysfunctional life, you probably learned it in a dysfunctional system, and the most frequent system that we learn our dysfunction in is the family system. Now, this whole concept of family systems is a relatively young concept. It was really not much done with it before the 1950s. In the 1950s, there's a group of therapists, and a lot of them were out in Palo Alto, in fact. They'd work with people, and they work with people and see marked improvement, and people with all kinds of different problems, depression, and sometimes even schizophrenia, and acting out behaviors and whatever. And then after working with these people, they'd send them home, and then there'd be a routine follow-up. The person would come back, and you know what they noticed? So often when the person came back, they were sick again. Sometimes when the person that came back wasn't sick again, someone else in the family got sick. So they started using terms like symptom bearer of the family problem, or the identified patient of a family illness. Sometimes I go one step further. I think that person sometimes, I see that person as a service provider to the family. The person that gets sick is very often providing a service to the family, drawing attention to the problems in the family, reflecting the problems in the family in their illness. Sometimes it's a vehicle for the family to get help. A kid who gets into drugs, starts to fry themselves, very often that's the kid that gets help, right? But how often does the family follow? Even providing the service of getting the family members help. I want to talk a little bit about systems, and then I'll talk about different kinds of dysfunctional families. The systems, I think it was bound to happen. We had to systematize things so computers could work. So our systematizing is part of the computer explosion, because otherwise we can't feed information into the computers and it doesn't make any sense. And so general systems theory has been developing right along. And general systems theory applied to social systems and family systems, you come up with certain things like all systems have components and principles. So social systems have components and principles too. Now the components in a family are not the members of the family. That would be too easy. We don't want to make things easy around here. So we make the components the relationships between the family members. See, now, when a component goes out in a system, the system dysfunctions. Sometimes, it's like if you think of an automobile engine as a system, and let's say you got a fouled spark plug. That component isn't going very well. Your system's still running, but it misses. All right, but there's certain components that'll make the car die immediately. Take the, disconnect the fuel line, even, and no gas, to the engine, and you don't run anymore. So some components are more important than others. The important components in a family system are mom's relationship with mom, mom's relationship with dad, dad's relationship with dad, and dad's relationship with mom. They're the architects of the system, and they're creating the system. Of course, they went to architectural school, and their architectural school is the system that they came from. And through the use of like report and command, you learn the new system. Some people maintain that on the first date a new system is created. I don't necessarily buy that, although a friend of mine talks about how it happens over 3 times. If it happens once, it's an accident. If it happens twice, it's a coincidence. And if it happens 3 times, it's a rule. And then that's the rule for the system. It's like rules control our behavior until they become overt. If the rule is covert and not talked about it, then it controls our behavior and it's hard to change. So we have to make it explicit to change it. Now, systems have principles too. Some of the principles of systems, we talk about how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That means that we didn't come from a vacuum. A lot of people, like I worked with a guy who says, hey, I ran away when I was 9 years old from home. You think my family affected me? It didn't at all. If it didn't affect you, you ran away from home at 9 years old and your family didn't affect your life? That's ridiculous. And so it's like, that family tree, where it grows? It grows right out of there. We carry it with us. It's like an umbrella shading and filtering a lot of what we're doing in our life. And we use chainsaw therapy. No, what we do is we try to help you see, what that is, making it explicit so that we can start to make those changes. But until you look at it, we reenact it. We stay in the system. And that's the whole is great. When, as a family therapist, well, actually, I'm not even a family therapist. I'm a family systems therapist, and that's different. Now, I've done family therapy, and what I noticed was if I just see one person, say I've got 5 members of the family, and I see one person at a time even for 5 hours, 1 hour each, I get a sense of what's going on. But if I see that whole family together for 1 hour, that shows more than the 5 hours will seeing one person at a time. Now, as a family systems therapist, I won't necessarily see the whole family, but I've got to get an idea of what it was like for that person in their family system to find out what happened to them, to find out what needs to become explicit, what feelings are there, and what system they're creating. So that's what a family systems therapist does. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Another one is that families always have rules and roles, which I've talked about, and I'll talk more about the roles in a little while. The key, again, is there's overt rules, and first kid's usually in charge of upholding those, of course. And then there's the covert rules, and those are the ones that control the family. The difference between an overt rule, my friend Renee Fredrickson talks about how there's a law that says the speed limit is 55 miles an hour, okay? That's the overt law, right? What's the covert law? Is it 65 in Colorado? Okay. Okay. And so in a lot of states it's 59. Now, in Arkansas, the overt law is 55, the covert law is 55. There's no discrepancy, right? There's no difference. But you see, in families, it's the covert ones that we follow. The overt ones are often easier to break, easier to deny, or easy to deal with. It's the covert stuff that gets us in trouble, like men don't cry, men don't hug men, women can't get angry, you can't trust men. Who's going to say that direct? Well, some families will say it directly, pardon me, but if it's a covert rule in the family, about touch and about food and about all kinds of things. A lot of families have rules about how much you weigh. Some families have rules that you always have to be 15 pounds over normal body weight. And then they'll give you feedback. They'll maintain the system by a system of feedback. They'll shame you if you start to lose weight or if you gain weight. And you can't win. So you end up staying 15 pounds overweight. You never feel great about it, but you're always within the system then, following that rule, the covert rule. Another one is that there's dynamic homeostasis in families. That's a tendency for things to remain the same over a period of time. Non-resolution of conflict that we have. If you look at the conflicts in your life and the problems in your life, and if you could trace your family back, I don't know how many, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, you'll see that same conflict or some form of that conflict over and over again recurring in those generations. It's like, I'm not saying there's nothing new under the sun, and you can change the conflict, but it'll still stem from the conflicts that we've come from. It's a key part of family systems, dynamic homeostasis. When we describe family systems, a lot of times what we do is we use this mobile analogy. A family is like a mobile with all these cross pieces hanging down. And that when you kind of go like that to part of the mobile, there's, the whole thing starts to stir up. And that's a statement that what affects one member of the family will affect all of the family. Tension on one part is tension on everybody. You ever notice, too, that when you go like that, one part might go like this, and there's another part going like that? A lot of times, the one with the most visible acting out severe problem is not the one with the most severe problem. It's they're acting it out for the person with it that's denying. It's like my mom would feel suicidal, but maybe it was my brother that really acted it out. And acted out, because she never really suicided, but she always felt it. So she looked like she was going like this, wavering, but he looked like he was going like this, real self-destructive and suicidal. All right, another thing about that analogy that I like, and this is an important one, is that if you go like that to a mobile, and then you walk away from the mobile, and then you come back to the mobile, what have you noticed? It's right back to where it was before you went like that. That's really dynamic homeostasis. You see, we want to make changes in our lives, right? Well, when we try to make these changes, we'll go through a program. We'll go to a workshop. We'll go on a diet. We'll go to treatment. But then, we're not there anymore. And where do we go to then? Dynamic homeostasis, to the dysfunction of the system that we originally came from. That system has a tremendous hold on us. That's why we talk about recovery not as an event, but as a process. And I don't think it's a 2-month process or a 3-year process. I think it's a lifelong process. I think that the alcoholics that have been in programs and that consider themselves alcoholics for the rest of their life and that continue to take care of themselves and work a program are the ones that have had the answer all along. I think that's true for all of us. We all need to build a program of care, of support, of networking to maintain change in our life. Because when we let go of that networking, so many of us go back to the dynamic homeostasis that was our original system. So that's the key part of dynamic homeostasis. There's also some stuff about boundaries and bonding that I'm going to be talking about a little later, too, in family systems. I think that, in fact, I'm going to do a talk on the commonalities of dysfunctional family systems that include a lot of this family system stuff. The things that I want to talk about with family systems are there are 4 kinds of systems, the dysfunctional systems that that we can come from that will really affect our lives. The first one is the chemically dependent family system. The second one is the sexually abusive family system. The third is the physically abusive system, and the second is emotional abuse. All right, now some of us came, and the chemical dependency is really the addicted family system, is what I'm talking about. Now, some of us came from one of the above, some of us came from all of the above at once, all right? Now, and that isn't what's so important right now, but there are some differences in the dynamics, and I want to talk about that a little bit. To talk about the chemically dependent family system, I think I have some chalk somewhere. I have it in my pocket. Okay, I need to talk a little bit about alcoholism again. As a matter of fact, I used to do a lot of lecturing on alcoholism and the disease process, and I had this lecture in 2 parts. The first part took me an hour and 15 minutes, and the second part took me an hour and 45 minutes. So that's 3 hours. That puts us at 6 o'clock, and we don't have that much time. So I'm going to have to shorten it, and I've been shortening it for a long time, so I'm not doing this just for you. I'm going to shorten the first part to about 11 seconds. Second part might take me a good 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, I haven't quite gotten that down so succinctly yet. Now, this is my lecture on alcoholism. It's coming up right here. Okay? Ta-da! This is alcohol, and this is a person. They look alike, don't they, actually? More and more of this person's life revolves around the use of alcohol. That's it. No applause, no nothing. I mean, you're just going to sit there and, wasn't that the most succinct lecture on alcoholism that you've ever heard in your life? Okay, I'm real proud of this lecture. It took me a long time to develop it. Now, the second part, the disease. We call it a disease. Why do we call it a disease? Well, it's primary. There are contributing factors, alkaloids in your brain, genetic disposition, chemical balance, abuse issues, model behavior, being an insurance salesman. I don't know. There's a lot of contributing factors. They go to lunch and but the fact is that it's still primary. It's not a secondary result of some other primary thing. There's just contributing factors. It's also primary, meaning that until we deal with the alcoholism, it's real difficult to deal with other things in our life. I think that a lot of alcoholics have gone into therapy, and they stay in therapy for like years, and the therapist is driving around in a Mercedes, and the alcoholic's still drinking. Same problem. Now, I don't think therapists always do this on purpose. No, sometimes they do it on purpose, but the fact is that they can't help an alcoholic till they address the alcoholism. Not with a marriage problem, not with a depression problem. So it's primary. It's also progressive. It tends to get worse in our life unless we really deal with it. There's de-escalation, but I think that the disease is progressing in our life even when we're de-escalating the use of the disease. Okay, so it's predictable. You go through stages with alcoholism. The thing that isn't predictable is the timing. Some people can do in a matter of months, what takes other people 50 years to do, which is burn themselves out. It's also, it's pervasive. It affects everything in your life eventually. And it's terminal. You die of it. Okay? That's my lecture. Pretty much. We treat alcoholism a lot. You ever notice that? Minneapolis. There's a treatment center on every corner. It's like we have more treatment centers in Minneapolis than Dairy Queens, I think. Not than bars, though. Never. Okay, so I want to ask you if you have any idea of why we treat this disease of alcoholism so much. I already gave you the answer. It was one of those things I just mentioned. Which one do you think it was? Okay, some say terminal, some say pervasive, and a few say... terminal makes sense, right? If it's a killing disease, wouldn't we want to treat it? And if you're going to talk to someone about, why you're going to send them to treatment, aren't you going to tell them that, you're concerned for their life? But that isn't why we treat it. Not really. At least I don't think it is. See, I kind of think that if we treated alcoholism because it was terminal, we'd treat cigarette smoking just as often. Did you know that cigarette smokers die 1 year earlier than alcoholics? It's 1 year more terminal. Now, when was the last time you heard of a cigarette smoker say, I just got back from the treatment 5 weeks, and had the family come in and they all sat around and they read this list. You don't hear cigarette smokers talk about that. When was the last time you formed an intervention on a cigarette smoker who was killing themselves with cigarettes? All the concerned person, specific debt and all that. Don't do it, do we? No. Why? Well, it's terminal, but it's not affecting us quite as much as alcoholism. Alcohol is pervasive. Those of you that said pervasive had the answer. Alcoholism is pervasive. It impacts crime, society, families for generations, and lots of other people. Industrial loss. Now, that's also a lie, kind of. Sorry about that. The real reason, I'm getting a little cynical, but the real reason I think we treat alcoholism so much is we get third-party coverage for the treatment of alcoholism. We don't for most other stuff. So or it's a different insurance kind of game. But the fact is that I'm glad we treat it, and it is pervasive, and it does impact the family. In fact, it impacts more than just the family. I kind of believe the statistic that says that one alcoholic severely impacts the lives of maybe 30 to 60 other people. One alcoholic. Now, there's 15 to 20 million alcoholics in our society, right? You multiply 30 times 20 million. What do you get? You get more people than we got. How can that be? That's not possible. Yes, it is possible. It's an intergenerational disease. In other words, my dad's an alcoholic. Now, it affected it affected me. It affected my feelings, my life. As I'm growing up, see, I'm supposed to get at this, like growing up is like building a jungle gym. You get all the bars straight and all the pieces, and I didn't get all the bars to my jungle gym. I'm walking around here missing some bars, And so, I'm climbing through life. Hey, I kind of like that, And then I slip and I crack my head because I'm missing a bar. It hurts my life and how I live my life. There's dysfunction there because I didn't get all the pieces because of the alcoholism in the family. Now, I didn't get those pieces, and then I had kids, and I decided that I was going to parent them, and I had an image of how I was going to parent them, and guess what I did? You're right. They got this jungle gym that looks a little bit like that, too. And especially my oldest, I gave him less, because I was in recovery later for him. So his first 10, 12 years of life, I hadn't been dealing with my reality, with my codependency, with my addictiveness. Okay, so it hurts him. Now, we're healing that, and I can hold him, and he can cry, but boy, for years, everything he did was wrong. I expect him to be, 17 at the age of 3, 25 at the age of 7, and be able to fix things and do things and always do it my way, and so I'm impatient and I'm controlling, and what am I doing? Well, I'm hurting his jungle gym. Now, he's an adult, he's pretty close anyway, he's 19 years old, and he's got a girlfriend, and, they're even talking about getting married. I think, well, they might have a kid. Now, I feel bad, first of all, because I didn't give him what he needed as a small child, but I know that I was trying to write checks out of an empty account. I didn't get it. How could I give it? Okay, now, if he didn't get it, he's going to have a struggle giving it too. He's got maybe some of it later, but as his kids, if he has a child that's small, it's going to be tough for him to give it. So I know that child that he hasn't even had yet, is going to be affected. I don't think he's had it. I better call. Is going to be kids move fast. Is going to be affected by one alcoholic 4 generations back. And you tell me how many of you are sure you haven't had an alcoholic 4 generations back in your system that didn't affect the system and the parenting and what you got developmentally and your codependency issues. Okay, so, there's one other thing about alcoholism that I missed in my 2 lectures, and that is that alcoholics, very much like a cross-section of society or the rest of us, don't like to live alone. In fact, it's really hard to maintain a disease like alcoholism without an enabling system. So they're usually in a relationship. And probably also similar to the rest of the population, the usual choice of relationship is with some of the opposite sex, although that isn't necessarily always true. But very often it is true. So you have a relationship with this person who is going to become and be called the codependent. Now I'll give you a visual description of codependency. This person's life revolves around that person's life. They're addicted to the addict. The kind of day they have depends on the addict's relationship with alcohol. Whether they feel like going shopping, getting out of bed, having a migraine headache for 4 years, or having 4 full-time jobs for 3 years. All depends on their relationship with the addict and the addict's relationship with alcohol. Their life is revolving around someone else's life. That's codependency. Now, these 2 people are usually, as I said, of the opposite sex. Like in my family, my dad was the alcoholic and my mom was the codependent. So they get together sometimes and they have some of these. And these are children of alcoholics. Okay, good. You guys are sharp. That I draw so well, you can't miss it. Now, there's a program, a helping program, and it's the fastest growing helping program in the United States today. What do you think it is? It's called Children of Alcoholics or Adult Children of Alcoholics, depending on which part of the country you're in. Okay, now that program is growing like crazy. And it's going to have more of an impact on how we treat alcoholism in our society and what we do with that disease than anything has had since the 12-step program was invented. Because children of alcoholics recognize and know full well, at least those in the program are recognizing, that it is a family disease. And I think in too many treatment centers we've been giving the family disease concept lip service only. I mean, if it's a family disease and everybody's sick, and you send the alcoholic to treatment, is that really acknowledging a family disease? Of course not. If you give a family just an educational program, is that acknowledging? No. That doesn't come close to acknowledging the family disease. And that doesn't give the family much of a chance to change, does it? The only chance the family has is for the family to go through a therapeutic process. At least, if not in duration and intensity, as much as the alcoholic goes through. That's the key to recovery for the alcoholic family. Let's look at what's going on in this system. Now, this is a system, say. A family, this is a system. And systems have certain needs, the need to exist in community, the need for the members to find a place in the system, take care of production, maintenance, relationship issues. So this is the system. Now, actually, why don't you tell me some of the needs of the system, and let's look at what happens. Just name anything. Something I said or something you can make up. Just name something. Pardon?
Belong.
A need to belong? Okay, you have a need to belong. But who do you belong to? If this is an alcoholic who's sort of missing in the picture in many ways, and that if this becomes super spouse, then everybody belongs to mom, and everybody takes care of him. But what if mom then all of a sudden shrinks and is in bed with a migraine headache for 3 years, or not active in the family, or is working 3 jobs and gone? Then who do you belong to? Well, someone in here might take over, and you belong to me. That's my sister. She used to chase us around with a shoe. She got into a role of little parent, and she was the one that was the enforcer in the family. And I don't know how the shoe got into the picture, but I remember being chased around by that shoe a great deal. And that was that I belonged to my sister. She was the one that enforced the discipline. Sometimes you don't belong to anybody and you get lost. Or for a period of time you get lost and you don't have a feeling of belonging. So the need isn't getting met. What other needs are there? You got to feel important. Okay? So how do you end up feeling important in this family? Well, let's look at what's missing and fill in some pieces. Is mom have a husband? Oh, I can feel significant and belong if I go back up here and I say, hey, I'm going to be my mother's husband. I'm going to be her counselor, her therapist, her surrogate spouse. She's going to cry on my shoulder, and I'm going to take care of my mom. Now, of course, I have a name for that. I call that emotional incest. Right? I mean, she was my first client. The therapy wasn't great, but, I was giving it my best shot. At 9 years old, you're not really fully trained for that sort of thing yet. She didn't complain, and I'd tell her about staying in her marriage and about her pain and, all this stuff. And so that's emotional incest. She calls that career development, though, see, because, I went on to make a living of it. So, that's perspective, some on this stuff. But now I have significance, and my mom has a husband, and I have a place in the family.